a guy named Todd Houck, who was a county lawyer here in Raleigh County mostly. And he, oh, we'll count that guy. He works here. I won't break out of character much longer. We'll do the story. He was prosecuting attorney. He goes, and he come up here one night, and we probably had 100 people that night. He said, "Butch, I want to tell you a story that my grandfather told me." I said, "Okay, great. It's about this, about the park." He said, "Well, it was prior to the park." And I said, "Okay, outstanding. Yeah, I'll tell it again if it's a good story." And so he told me a story that his grandfather told him. Here's that story. It was downtown Mullins in late July or August. There was an old man walking down the street. If you're familiar with Mullins at all, he is walking toward where the bank is. Just ahead on his left would have been where Bud and Henry had a restaurant eventually. So he's walking down through there. Parking meters are still there. They're not now. You don't need them now. There's not enough people parking there, I guess. But he's walking down there, and the sun, it's so hot. It's probably near 100, Todd says, what his grandfather told him. So anyway, he's walking down through there. And men in those days always carried a handkerchief, big old handkerchief. Now, they might have a little corner of it that they actually clean their nose with or something, but that was not normally what you did 1,000 things with a great big handkerchief. Sometimes, even now, you might tie one around your head. They'd do that too if they needed something. But mostly, he just had it for odds and ends to get done. And he'd stop and he'd say, "God, it's so hot." And he was an old man. And he'd wipe the sweat like this. And he would think out loud or even quietly in his mind, "Lord, it sure is hot." He'd go a ways more. And he'd wipe the sweat again. And he'd say, "Man, it sure is hot." And then he gets almost to the bank, and the buildings are a story lower here. And the sun, it's not yet noon, and it's that hot. But the sun now is above the, we counted you. The sun now clears that building. So not only is it hot, it's really wearing this old guy out. Now the sun directly on him. You're on a hot day and you're suddenly in the sun. It's like 20 degrees hotter. It's not really, but it feels like it. And he went, "Oh my Lord, it sure is." And he leaned, he kind of lost it, and he went up and fell against the parking meter. And he went, "Oh man, what's going on?" Boom! And just like that, he wasn't in Mullins anymore. It was still hot. And he was walking in a big field. There was trees behind it, like this, but much bigger. And he was thinking, "Lord, where am I? This looks familiar." And he looked out, and there was a bunch of people gathered out there, way out there. And he looked, and he thought, "This looks familiar to me." And it looked like there was a preacher preaching. And there was a big box or something there, and people gathered around, kind of like here, but the preacher's preaching. And he walked closer, and he thought, "Oh, Lord, I remember this. I was a little boy. And before it got daylight, my mom woke me up and said, 'You have to get up, son. You have to get up. You and your dad are going to go up towards Slab Fork, and it's a pretty long walk. But we got to hurry because you have to go up there and get some pine boards. We have to make a casket today because your little friend died overnight. And it sure is hot. We got to get him in the ground. Maybe by tomorrow, but no later than the day after because it's hot.'" And he said, "Okay, Mommy." He said, "I remember being tore up that my friend had died." But he got up and he went towards Slab Fork with his dad, and they got the timber and brought it back. Probably had a horse, but it wasn't in the story. So they get that and they come back. And sure enough, they built that pine box. And he remembered standing there. And the preacher was preaching. And there's a little wooden casket. And his best buddy, 6 or 8 years old, is in there. And he's dead, and it sure is so hot. And he felt guilty because he remembered an old man, 70 or 80 years later, thinking back to that. And no matter how much I was sad that my friend had died, I kept thinking, "I wish that preacher would hurry because it sure is hot." And he thought, "Oh, goodness." And he went, "How am I here? What is going on? Did I die? Am I just, what's going on?" And he said, I got closer and closer. And sure enough, it was the preacher. And there was his little friend in that casket. People didn't seem to notice him. And the preacher was preaching. And about every 30 or 40 seconds, the preacher would wipe the sweat off his brow. And about every third time he did that, he reached down and wiped the sweat off that little boy in the casket. And he said, I went, oh God, no! Oh, and he fell and he was back in Mullins. And he was freezing. He said, it took me 70 years to realize what I saw that day. Dead little boys don't sweat. Oh my God, they buried him alive. Just didn't know it. And he did. He's buried in this park. I will not tell you which cemetery, but Todd Houck probably would. Sure is hot. Buried that little boy alive. You think, how could that possibly happen? Well, now they check pretty extensively if you're dead or not. And every now and then you'll read about someone who raised up in the morgue. Ah! You know, and there's somebody there raised up. Well, they were just in a deep coma or something. I mean, back then they might put a little mirror or glass near your face, see if any fog came on it. Listen to your heart. He seems cool. Dead. You know. Which is why, as a way, they would leave somebody there. In fact, something they used to do a long time ago is they'd tie a string around your finger, run it up through the casket, tie it on a little bell on a post. People would stand there, or at least be close enough to hear it. And if you happened to be alive in that casket and came to, you'd struggle around, especially if you realized where you were. You know, and that bell would ring. And you're saved by the bell. That was not originally a boxing term. It was how you would do that. Now think about that. That happened right out here on this rock. And he said 70 years it took him to realize what he had seen and everybody there had seen. How do you miss that? Why are you wiping the sweat off a dead boy who couldn't possibly be sweating? Now, I know where that grave is. After Todd told me that story, I went there at midnight. I even went there on Halloween once. But mainly I went there when it was summer in July or August and hot. And I just waited. I thought, buddy, if you have something to let us know, let me know. I mean, I'm not a ghost hunter guy. I hunt ghost stories, not ghosts. I'm afraid of ghosts, but I thought this little kid might need somebody to understand, you know, but I've never had an experience there. But Todd Houck swore that people did over the years. Right here, sure is hot. Now I'm going to tell you a headless ghost story.